Hello, I'd like to call the Wednesday, April 13th, 2022 regular meeting of the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission to order. My name is Evan Sear, and as some people know, our chair and both of our commissioners have resigned. Clerks, I said, yeah, commissioners, geez. If our commissioners resigned, we'd really be at the creek. I am acting as interim chair. I'm going to do recognition of new members, and then I'm actually going to ask the board if they would like to move up an item, and I will get back to that in a minute. There have been two new appointments to the LawPEC board. The interlocal agreement stipulates the length of terms for these members, but does not describe specific start and end dates. In the absence of clarification, I've identified full terms for each of our new members based on attendance at their first LawPEC meeting. I would suggest that the board take a policy stance on the start date of terms for new members, possibly at this meeting if we have time, but most definitely at a future meeting. Having said that, I will introduce Rick LaChapelle first. Rick is the City of Lewiston Council representative. His term is going to run from March 2022 through March 2025, although I did make note in the meeting memorandum that council members serve a 2-year term on the council. It just sort of highlights a discrepancy between the interlocal agreement and council appointments, and that's, again, something that we might want to look at when we revisit the idea of appointment start dates and end dates. The other member that was appointed is Glenn Holmes. Glenn is sitting as a representative for the towns of Minot, Hebron, and Buckfield. His term would run from March 2022 to March of 2023. I've made some notes for myself, and I believe that we should have a discussion about this particular appointment. There's some confusion surrounding the appointment process. In the past, the appointee has been appointed by their respective board for this seat, by their respective board of selectmen, and then verbally conferred with the 2 other towns for approval. It's my understanding that Mr. Holmes followed the same process after a discussion I had with him, and that he did so after consultation with the outgoing member of that who held that seat, Mr. Steve French. I think that it would be prudent for the board to make a decision as to whether this is acceptable. If not, it's my opinion that we should adopt whether or not this is acceptable. It's my opinion that we should find that it is acceptable, but that the board provide clarification, providing Mr. Holmes with the opportunity to meet commissioner expectations. I would suggest that this appointment be understood to begin at the current March meeting instead of such time as he is able to present the commissioners with any additional documentation that we may desire with regard to his appointment. I'm asking for that simply because Mr. Holmes followed the protocol that's been followed by the previous commissioner in that seat. I think it highlights the need for the commission to develop a clear policy and procedure around appointments, specifically those appointments that require more than one board of selectmen. To that end, I'll ask for any discussion from commissioners.
So what I understand you saying is that one community puts together something with their board that appoints the person, and then phone calls are just made to the other 2 towns?
That seems to be what has happened in the past, and so that was the protocol that was followed this time, although that doesn't necessarily meet the language of the interlocal agreement.
Can there just be a letter of support from the other community so there's something on file? I know we're trying to keep better documentation, that's all.
I think we can decide that we are willing.
More formal, but just a letter saying we agree with this appointment.
That is absolutely up to us, I think.
Yeah.
Mr. Holmes?
I think the easiest one would be is if all 3 towns at least acknowledge it in their meetings, which would put it in their minutes, and then the copy of minutes would be forwarded instead of generating another letter, which can be for small towns difficult sometimes, being from a small town.
Better documentation?
Yep, because right now I have a copy of the minutes from the Buckfield meeting where I was appointed.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you explain that process that you did go through? Just
Sure, I went to my board of selectmen and said, hey, we are allowed to have a seat for Minot, Hebron, Buckfield on the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission, and I've been wanting to do it for a long time. And I think now's a good time, because I've heard rumor that they're looking to enact things that may impact our three communities. And I knew Mr. French had been doing it for a long time.
so had Mr. French resigned his position?
No, he had not when I was appointed. He did shortly afterwards.
So they appointed you before the resignation of the existing representative?
Which again highlights the need for
Yeah.
a clear direction from the
Well, how,
commissioners,
yeah, forgive me, but how do we know the other two communities are supporting with that?
At this point, my word. I talked to Hebron. They talked about the selectmen's meeting. I don't have a copy of the minutes. And I talked to the administrator from the city of Minot, and she saw no issues, and she's going to bring it to her board next week, but she said she didn't think there'd be any issue at all. I mean, I know all three boards care.
And what was the opinion of our past chairperson? He was the one that resigned.
So that is the procedure that our past chairperson followed. It is my understanding that, I understood it that Mr. French received appointment from the Board of Selectmen of Minot and then reached out to see other communities, further consultation. He was of the assumption that someone from LAPAC reached out to them. So there's confusion as to who actually would reach out to who and what sort of documentation was provided.
But I would agree that it needs to be documented at those other boards and put forward in their minutes that they're supportive. I mean, that would be the clear in the future. And whatever y'all want to do with me, it's fine.
In the letter of resignation from the former chair, did he say anything in regards, or just I resign?
The letter was quite straightforward, simply stating that he wished to resign at this time. I did reach out to Mr. French and ask him if he wanted to add anything else, but he did not respond.
If he had not resigned, would we have had two people?
Right,
If
that's
he,
my concern.
if he had not
Yeah.
resigned, we
Because it was
would be
mine.
in a much deeper quagmire right
Okay.
now.
Well, my concern is that until we have documentation that the other towns have approved of Glenn, that perhaps he should refrain from casting votes today.
Well, then we would have to refrain from all of Mr. French's votes for the last 21 years,
Well,
because he
There's-
never, I mean,
I
I
don't know
I don't think there's
about-
only a few members that have been here as long as I have, Heather, I think.
I'm only saying because
Yeah.
this was approved prior to the resignation of Steve French.
Okay, I see.
Not that the process is
Yeah, so
different.
there are 3 criteria in the interlocal agreement for this multi-town. 1 member appointed by the municipal officers of the town of Minot, Hebron, and Buckfield to represent the towns of Minot, Hebron, and Buckfield. That the member representing the towns of Minot, Hebron, and Buckfield shall be appointed for a 1-year term on a rotating basis unless otherwise agreed by the municipal officers. And that the members appointed to represent one or more towns shall be elected or appointed officials thereof. He meets all 3 criteria,
Yeah.
and he's gotten permission from all 3 towns, so.
Well, we don't know that, other than he said that, and his board actually approved it prior to the resignation of Steve French, so that seems to be,
Well, it calls into question the procedural quagmire we find ourselves in,
Right.
because if the town of Buckfield appointed someone to the Board of LAPAC, it would suggest that they never in fact agreed to appoint Steve.
But we don't
Because
know
they
what,
saw,
we don't know
because
what
they
they were
saw
told
fit
at
to
the
appoint,
meeting.
but we
to
don't,
appoint a
yeah, we
member.
don't know that they knew that Steve French was still representing their town.
Right.
Right, and that's that issue, right? That's the
Yeah,
issue.
We don't, yeah, exactly.
At issue is that we do not have any policies and procedures that seek to clarify that appointment position. So, there are 2 issues that I'm asking commissioners to handle at the beginning of this meeting so that Mr. Holmes has direction as to how he's going to act. And so that we have clarification on what it is that we want to see from that appointee. So, we need to make a decision as to what the documentation is that we will feel is acceptable to demonstrate that that seat has been appointed appropriately. and in accordance with the interlocal agreement. That's our first decision. The second decision we need to make immediately before we begin is whether or not Mr. Holmes should continue as a voting member of the commission for this meeting, if he should not participate at all, not even in discussion as a commissioner, or if we are going to allow him to continue in this meeting as a voting commissioner because he followed the procedure that was followed by the previous commissioner that had his seat. So there are two issues. So having said that, I think perhaps it would be easiest to clarify what the documentation is that we would like. So what my personal opinion is, I like Mr. Holmes's suggestion that we ask that discussion appear in the minutes. Are there any ideas with regard to specific documentation that commissioners would like to see?
Did we get a letter from Buckfield? I thought I saw something.
It's in, yes, it was in their, I know it was in their minutes.
So we got something that's documented at this point from one of the communities?
2/3 of the way down the first page.
Okay.
And I have extra copies in this one.
So, seeing no other ideas with regard to what we want for documentation, and in order to give Mr. Holmes clear direction, I would seek a motion at this time to direct Mr. Holmes to approach the boards of selectmen of both Minot and Hebron and ask that they discuss his appointment within the minutes. And,
Second.
okay. Well, I'm asking for a motion,
So
so
moved.
moved by Mr. LaChapelle. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. Is there any discussion? We'll vote by show of hand. Yes?
Now's the quagmire. What happens if you're from Minot,
Buckfield.
Buckfield? If Minot says no, that they have Mr. Smith that they want to put on?
Then my guess is that the worst case scenario will be 2 of the 3 towns will support it. Because I already know that Hebron has said they would.
Even
That's an interesting question, Ed. My assumption is that if we adopt this motion stating that this is our litmus for full appointment, that in the absence of that documentation, there is no appointment.
Okay.
The towns all figure it out.
The towns will have to figure it out. What they will also need to recognize is that the interlocal agreement is quite clear, and it states that, let me get,
Your hair,
I get it. The commission shall be administered by a 9-member board. So those of us that are familiar with policy and procedure recognize that shall does not mean maybe. So if we do not have a commissioner, it means that we cannot conduct, could be argued that we cannot conduct business. So that would be an issue. But that would be an issue that those towns would have to figure out.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor of the motion?
And the motion was
Yeah, can we repeat the motion?
documentation
okay.
and then minutes.
The motion is to require that the commissioner holding the seat from Minot, Buckfield, and Hebron receive appointment from the Board of Selectmen in the town that they live, and that their appointment be discussed and approved within the minutes of the Boards of Selectmen of the other 2 towns.
Can I add an amendment to that, or is it?
Make a motion to amend.
Can I make a motion to amend?
Yes, of course.
Do I just now do the amendment?
Yeah, just do it. I know, we are not used to parliamentary procedure here, I know.
So, can we ask for the minutes to be dated or after the resignation of Steve French? That way, we know that this, I would feel more comfortable if the town select board at their next meeting just reiterates their approval of Glen Holmes.
Does everyone understand the implications of the amendment? So there's, of that motion, so there's a motion to amend, is there a second?
I'm just thinking of ramifications of it, I guess.
The ramifications are that, this parish would like, Mr. Holmes to go back and have, Buckfield have the discussion again now that Mr. French has resigned.
So that the
So
dates, so
reaffirm-
the dates line up in our record keeping.
To
Right.
reaffirm their decision.
Right.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
The amendment.
Would that eliminate this meeting today?
That's a very good question.
Because you no longer have 9 commissioners.
It depends on the motion. I guess it would depend on the motion that, well, it could stop the meeting right now.
If that,
I think, you raise an interesting point. I think that, I was hoping to handle this as 2 separate items. Because I was hoping to just ask for documentations, but it is true that this amendment does add qualifying language. So if this second if this amendment is approved, I would ask that a commissioner make an additional amendment qualifying whether or not we believe Mr. Holmes can participate in that. So that would all be part of one motion. I'd hope to keep it separate, but now that there's qualifying language, yes.
just to follow it up, it's painfully evident, and you've made it, that this committee, this commission, has been very free on discussion and nothing, they haven't dotted i's across t's at all. At this point, I don't think anybody's going to object if the former chair would have, if he'd have written a scathing response why he's resigning, I would have a problem with it. He hasn't said anything, he's done the one line, and of all due respect for a gentleman that's been here forever, I'm fine. Put him in, let's get it in for today, and I think our next meeting, we should have just a restructuring of how this commission works, and Robert's rules, the whole 9 yards, and bring this subject up, and we start discussing on parliamentary procedure. Who's even taking notes for today?
We do have a secretary.
Okay, there we go. I thought everybody resigned, so I was just...
We've retained our secretary and our treasurer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's get them on so we can have the meeting. We have people here. It's a rather important meeting, and let's just move forward. And the next meeting, he just gets the documentation for right now. He's on for a year. So the next year, just address those towns with that. So I would be in favor of just, he's here, let's get going. So I would kill that, I would vote against the motion right now, the second motion. The amendment, I would vote against the amendment, just keep that first motion and that's fine.
Is there any other discussion?
When do we want that documentation?
If I don't have it for you at the next meeting, I will resign. If all 3 towns do not support me, I will not sit there.
And if he votes today and then they choose not to have him,
You're stuck with me for the votes I did, and then I'm resigning, and you have somebody else.
Stuck with him for 3 more meetings.
Is there any other discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, we'll take a vote at this time. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? Motion fails.
The amendment fails.
The amendment, well, the motion to amend, I guess, say fails, yeah. So the main motion regarding the specific documentation that we'd like to see is still on the table. Is there any further discussion? Does anyone need clarification of the motion again? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands at this time. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? All those in abstention? Noted. To your point, Mr. LaChapelle, I would entertain a motion at this time stating that the commissioners qualify Mr. Holmes's appointment as a seat for Buckfield, Minot, and Hebron for this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands at this time. All those in favor? All those opposed? None? Those in abstention? One. Excellent. This is gonna be the
Well, that was fun.
Yes. So I guess I ran part of the meeting, and I guess I could have moved. Before we move any further, item number 7A, subsection I, discussion of chair and vice chair. I would like to briefly describe that and ask if we want to move that, and if not, we'll take it up in order as it is on the agenda. There's no direction provided in the interlocal agreement regarding how the board should address the resignation of any of its officers. So the board will need to decide how it wants to deal with the recent resignation of its chair. Currently, I'm serving as interim chair, but I was elected vice chair. Is it a pleasure? So right now, I would like, if there are members that would like to change that, we should move that item now instead of taking it up halfway through the meeting. Is there any, so that way that person who's duly elected chair runs the rest of the meeting?
Make a motion to move it to the front of the agenda.
Okay, you do make a motion to move something? Okay. So as mentioned, there is no direction provided in the interlocal agreement. Oh, I apologize. There is a motion on the table. Is there any discussion? I'm just ready to move forward. All those in favor? Opposed? None being, motion passes. There is no direction. Currently, I'm sitting as the interim chair because the chair resigned. There actually is no language in the interlocal agreement that says that the vice chair will serve as interim chair. Should there be no chair? So that like seriously highlights a need to update policy. However, it was sort of decided that board without a chair is gonna flounder. So so the first thing we need to do is decide if we are going to elect a new chair, if we are going to decide that I assume the role of chair and elect a vice chair. Before we can make the decision, there's an important disclosure that everyone should be aware of. Everyone should be aware that I am also concurrently the chairperson for the planning board for the city of Auburn. And I am a big policy and procedure person. I think it's important for everyone to understand, have a full grasp of what's going on. So I think it's appropriate to make that disclosure. I think it's actually, as far as I'm concerned, really, really important. So we all know that. Does anybody have any questions about that?
No, I'm just wondering whether does anyone have interest in being the vice chair, or any discussion around, do we elect two new ones, or however that goes? What's the general comments about that before any motions are made, I guess?
I mean, for me, I think any other organization I've been part of, the vice chair assumes the chair's position, and as long as they're willing to serve, it would be, and then it'd be an election for a new vice chair.
Would you do the election of the vice chair at this meeting?
I would,
Yeah.
because if you turn by a bus tomorrow, we need somebody else to
Right.
step into that. So be careful, probably.
Right?
Historically, the chairman has alternated between Lewiston and Auburn, and Steve, I think, was the first time he had not been a Lewiston Auburn rep. So maybe when we do update the charter, we can include all the towns. But right now, I can't remember the last time we had an Auburn chair. So I'm
When
in
I first
favor.
started, there was an Auburn chair.
It was.
John Bono.
Who was it?
John Bono?
John, that's right.
You also had Bob Thompson for a while there.
Yeah, I've been in several.
So is that a discussion we should have a chair just for a year as well, or?
I think that any discussion we have right now, it says elect annually. I think that any motions that are made to elect need to backdate to the, when did we do this, in the February meeting? So that way there's not an additional term tacked onto the officer. Yes, Mr. Leschevelle?
Again, like we just did, let's get a chair and vice chair in the next meeting. Let's work on policy and clean this all up. Let's just get moving forward.
All right, so,
You need a motion to have you stay as chair.
Right.
I need a motion to do
I'll-
something.
I'll make a motion to have the vice chair move to the position of chair to finish out the term of the original chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion of the motion?
Just the term of the original chair, you mean the term?
Till next year, February.
Okay, so for 12 months. Okay.
Well, 11.
Well, 11 months,
11
that's fine.
11 months, okay.
Is there any additional discussion?
I would just ask you if you feel that there's any conflict of interest between chairing the planning board of Auburn and chairing the LOPAC.
I have done some soul searching with regard to that. I don't think there is. I think there might be if I was a sort of municipal official who tended to have strong opinions and had an agenda. I'm really a policy and procedure guy. It's really important to me that we follow the rules, and if we're supposed to be in charge of something, that's what we're in charge of. Good question. Yes.
I would say the conflict would resist in your vote, not in your right of the meeting. And that's not going to change either way.
Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion or comments?
I don't know what it's called, but you know, when you swear in officers and commissioners, I think it's a good idea that we talk about that next meeting as part of the
Certainly.
protocol, because I think that's part of the ethics and, you know, that kind of piece of being sworn in. And this is our mission, and when I'm here, this is the hat I'm wearing. I think that would be good for the next meeting, and it might kind of address any concerns from any conflicts of interest.
Thank you.
I agree. Any other comments or discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, we'll take a vote by show of hands at this time. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? None, and abstention. I think that we should elect a vice chair at this point. I think that it would, because we operate under an interlocal cooperative agreement, it would be my preference that commissioners from Auburn not be elected to vice chair. Sorry, guys. I just think
That's
that,
fine.
I think that it is not in the best interest of a cooperative.
Are you looking for nominations?
So, yes, are there any nominations?
I'll nominate Rick Chappelle.
I'll second that.
I'll nominate Alan.
I would need a
Where's
second.
Alan come
So what happens, again, we run into the issue where, why don't, I will lay down some ground rules, because we have done. And if there is no objection, those are what we will roll with. In the past, members have been, motions have been made to nominate. It has been a real sticky wicket with regard to the vote. I think what will happen is I will take each of them in the order in which they were nominated, knowing that, for instance, if you wish to vote for Mr. LaChapelle, then you would vote in favor during that motion. If you wish to vote for Mr. Holbrook, you'll vote in favor during that motion. Is everyone clear as to the process? Were you going to second the motion to nominate Mr. Holbrook? It looked like you might.
No, I was gonna ask a question.
Okay, go ahead. There is a motion on the table though, and I'd like
Finish the motion.
to see if there's a second. Seeing no second, the motion dies.
I just want to, you know, support Williston, of course.
Do we know when Mr. LaChapelle's expiration date is? Because I'm still a little uncertain on the
Yeah.
Lewiston side.
It's on the
There's
front page.
3 Lewiston reps.
Mr. LaChapelle's term will expire with regard to the interlocal agreement prior to March 2025. The meeting prior to the March meeting 2005. However, his seat on the council expires at the end of 2024.
Okay. And who expires in 24 from Lewiston? And who expires in 23 from Lewiston? There should be one expiring
22
each year.
Is Dan, I think, isn't it? I think you're finishing out a term for somebody.
Because that record doesn't show the stag
It doesn't, and I think you bring up an important point that we can address
At the next-
at a later date,
at
but
the
I'm
next
not sure it's
meeting.
pertinent to the election of the vice chair.
Correct.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? None being abstention? Excellent. All right. I will bring us back to the minutes. The minutes of the February 9, 2021 regular meeting. Mr. Mike Broadbent, the LAWPIC secretary, has completed the minutes of the regularly scheduled meeting held on Wednesday, February 8, 2021 at 3:30 p.m. in this room. The draft minutes are included with this meeting packet for your review and acceptance. Video of the meeting has been posted on the Watershed website for public viewing and as a record of the meeting. Are there any amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, at this time I would accept a motion to accept the minutes.
Make a motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
There's a motion to second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, all those in favor?
Sorry, was I not paying attention?
Okay, all those opposed? All those in abstention? 2 abstentions being members who were not present at the meeting, in case the public was wondering what that was about.
I should probably abstain as well then, because I wasn't present at the February meeting.
I don't think it's necessary for you to abstain if you've read the minutes,
Okay.
and watch the video.
I did.
Oftentimes a member that isn't present will abstain. I don't think it's a requirement. I think for these gentlemen it is a requirement because they were not actually
Okay, thank you.
members of the commission at that time.
Can I just ask a question? So I
Yes.
left early at that meeting, so that's why the votes changed from 7 to 6.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we've typically, Mike, added that, commissioner left at a certain time, just putting out.
I haven't done that in the past. The only time I've added a note is if one showed up, and I'll put Commissioner so-and-so showed up at such time, and then the votes show more.
So this meeting is going to highlight a lot of procedural deficiencies, and what I would ask members to do is, as these things come up, can you please make note of them for yourself? And send them to myself and the commission officers and the LAWPIC officers, and we will talk about trying to get those together on a future agenda. So we're seeing some of these points coming up, right? The next item is consent agenda. A motion will be required on this. In the past, the items under consent agenda have been presented in full during LAWPIC board meetings. In the interest of creating greater conformity between LAWPIC board meeting order and conventional rules of order for meetings under Robert's rules, although we have not adopted those, we've discussed adopting those several times. These items will be voted on collectively with no oral reports being made. Commissioners may choose to remove items from the consent agenda through motion to be placed as regular items on the agenda consisting of presentation, discussion, and approval by motion.
Move the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? Those opposed? Being none, none on abstention. At this time, we would like to call for public comment. Again, the commission has no rules for public comment, and so I'm going to present a set of rules that I think we may wish to utilize. If there are no objections, I will put those rules out to members of the public. If there are objections, I will simply retract those rules and invite public to speak in the absence of those rules. We would ask members that members of the public are invited to address this board regarding any topic related to the business of the Lake Arlen Watershed Protection Commission. The members of the public would be asked to begin by stating their name and address, and if they are speaking on behalf of someone else, that they please state that prior to providing their comment to the board. That we would ask speakers to limit their comments to a timely manner. I'm not sure I want to throw out a specific number right now, because that's not something we've discussed, and numbers can be quite controversial. Simply asking members of the public to be succinct, I think at this point is sufficient. That each speaker be asked to speak only once. That is to say, not speak, sit down, then come back during the public comment section of the meeting, unless they seek and are granted permission by the board at large to enter comment on a separate topic, so that if they would like to speak on 2 topics, they may speak twice. With the understanding that this time is for commissioners to hear from the public, and that we will not take questions from the public to be answered during the public comment of this section of the meeting, but that generally commissioners would be willing to take notes during public comment to address questions raised once the public comment section has been closed and prior to any additional agenda items, and that in some very limited circumstances, commissioners may seek clarification from staff during public comment or ask for clarification from a member of the public who's addressing the board. Is there any objections to utilizing those rules for this public comment session? Seeing none, as the presiding officer, I will implement those rules for public comment. Are there any rules? Were you guys, were the public able to hear?
I'd like to comment on that. As long as you're speaking as loud as you are speaking now, I can hear fine. I've heard 2/3 or 3/4 of what people have said. Perfectly fine. But when you drop your voices and converse amongst yourselves, sometimes you say important things, and then I can only hear half of it, and my mind has to work to try to figure out, what did he or she just say? So please don't drop your voices.
Thank you.
Remember that we're back here, and some of us have slight hearing losses, so just keep your voices as loud as you're speaking now. Thank you.
Thank you. Very fair comment. Appreciated. So at this time, are there any members of the public that would like to address the LawPAC board? I think it's probably most appropriate. You could probably sit or stand, but again, we're in a room without microphones, so we'll have to make sure that we're protecting.
I simply would like to say that on this issue of conflict of interest.
Mr. Lonsberg, I'm sorry.
Yes, excuse me.
Just, yeah.
I'm Dr. Ben Lounsbury. I live at 505 West Auburn Road. And I would like to see this commission follow Robert's Rules of Orders very carefully. I thank you, Mr. Sear, for trying to straighten that out, running this meeting the best you can. I understand that you're going to work on your bylaws or work on procedure somehow so that this kind of quagmire won't develop again. But just let me say that I am a little disappointed that Mr. Sear has been elected the chairman, because I don't like the appearance of conflict of interest. I think that his being the chairman of this board represents a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Are there any other thank you very much. Are there any other members that wish to address the LawPAC board?
Fred Holler, 352 West Auburn Road. I went to the planning board meeting last night. I agree. I think there's a definite conflict of interest when a member of the planning board is the chairman of this. Ordinarily, the communication and the involvement of Lake Auburn with the 2 cities has been a non-political situation. It's super political now, especially with the rezoning of the area around the lake. So I also understand that I was there last night. The city attorney for Auburn, Mr. Malloy, preceded the meeting by giving the members of the planning board instruction about conflict of interest and what to do if you thought somebody had a conflict of interest. Later on in the meeting, someone who was on the board attending by Zoom, who did have a conflict of interest. He was involved in the sale of property around the lake within the water district. To me, and then it was brought up that you had a conflict of interest. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I left the meeting before this all happened. And he denied he had a conflict of interest. Well, he was a realtor. He's selling the property. And the board knew that. And one of the options the board had was to bring up the issue of conflict of interest and vote whether the person had a conflict of interest or not. That didn't happen.
Oh, I will interject and say that the board did vote. The board found unanimously that they felt there was not a fiduciary conflict of interest, which is conflict of interest under state statute, that they felt the member could act without bias.
Okay, well, any reasonable person other than the
I would
planning
ask that
board
there are not
felt
personal
that,
attacks though, sir.
Pardon me?
I would just ask that there aren't personal attacks.
I'm not attacking anybody personally, I just think that you had a conflict of interest. You were chairing the meeting last night about the water district, and a conflict of interest did come up, and the board failed to really, they looked like deer in the headlights. It just didn't act appropriately. And now, here we are in the middle of an intercity controversy over our water supply, and it is a very political issue, because we're talking about development around the lake. And I just think we've got to be very careful with conflict of interest, and that's why the city attorney was there last night, to tell people that you've got to be careful. And they weren't, in my view.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board during the public comment section?
Heather Hunter, treasurer for the Watershed. Does the commission want to send Steve French anything as a recognition for his service? He is one of the founding commissioners, and this is the only area I could find on the agenda to ask that question. And if so, what would you like to do?
All right, I will bring that up directly after public comment.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to address the Board of LAWPAC? Seeing none, I will close the public comment section of the hearing. As identified in the rules going forward, we would take notes and address questions that were raised. We'll start with the question of Mr. French. Is that something we would like to do? I would assume that is something we would all like to do. The question being, what do we want to do?
Okay.
What do we want? How much does a gold watch cost? I guess.
I've seen traditionally somebody just buy, well, I have a bunch of gold watches. Traditionally, I've seen other boards just get a nice plaque or something like that in recognition and present him with some kind of a plaque, recognition of his years of service to the watershed.
Can we maybe get Carolyn to put like a nice picture of Lake Auburn? You know how you can get the plaque made with a photograph?
And possibly put something in the paper thanking him, just a presentation, invite him to a meeting or something like that, present it to him and just recognize his years of dedication.
Shoot, Caroline, you and Eric put together that picture or whatever with a little plaque on it or something. And
We can do that.
So that's my next question
yeah,
is,
thanks.
we don't have clerks who would normally handle this, so the question is, Erica, would you be willing to?
Do the plaque?
Yes.
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 Okay.
And what do we authorize for expenditure? What's an appropriate amount for?
Probably at least 300 for something quality, you know. But
I have no idea how much a plaque is.
I would feel
just want to know how much
It's like a
Lewiston's
picture
going to
with a
pay
plaque.
versus.
They pay half of our budget, Dan. Calm down. All right. So, I personally, to add to this conversation with regard to cost, I would personally feel comfortable allowing Erica to spend an amount that she feels is prudent.
Yeah.
Correct.
And leave it at that.
Do you want to invite Steve to a meeting as was suggested to present it to him? Or
I think the next meeting in which we are in possession of the plaque, I think would be.
okay. Yep.
Does anybody have objections to that? All right.
Great idea.
Do you need a vote to expend those funds?
That's a good question.
I think-
We have no policy
think-
regarding
okay.
that. In
Next
fact, in the
meeting,
past-
I think it's appropriate, though.
In the past, staff has just been authorized to do so, but if commissioners would feel comfortable, you can certainly make a motion to do so. We do have our finance, we do have our treasurer here. It looks like she would like to weigh in. Yes, sir.
Just similar to how both municipalities work, if the board approved the budget, that approved the appropriation. So it's only those items that were not specifically outlined in budget that went before the board to get special authorization to appropriate. This was not part of the budget, it doesn't fit into any specific categories, it would fit in the miscellaneous, but it was not specifically outlined as retirement recognition, so yes, I would agree that we should authorize it.
Okay, I think if the person dealing with our finances believes it should be authorized, then it most certainly should be authorized. Is there a motion?
So moved, that we give her, it's not gonna be a dollar amount.
Not to exceed, not to exceed $500.
Certainly.
So
That's a really nice plaque.
So there's a motion on the table, and as I understand it, the motion is to authorize Erica Kidd to purchase the plaque, the cost of said plaque not to exceed $500, and to invite Mr. French to our next regular meeting for presentation.
Correct.
Is there a second of that motion?
Second
that. Discussion?
And anything else you may need to buy to make that happen. Whether it be a card, some snacks for that night, it may cost you something, put it in the newspaper or whatever.
There's a motion to amend, I guess.
Well, no, I
Just-
just,
It's
All
a
right.
friendly amendment.
Friendly
Friendly amendment.
Look, we're saying
Yes,
up
do
to
it.
$500.
Yeah.
If the plaque costs $300, she's get $200 to
Right.
spend on
Card and
on this. All right.
Amy will bring food.
Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? None being abstention? None being. Great. There were issues, additional issues raised during public comment. Are there any questions that commissioners wanted to raise based on those comments?
I just think this is another topic that we need to bring up at the next meeting. Because we can go around the room and there's painfully evident, there's a bunch of us that have conflicts of interest or could be perceived as somewhat of a conflict of interest. Since this commission has run very loosey-goosey forever, when we start talking about it at our next meeting, that's definitely something we should be addressing. So right now, we're still running crazy and loose. Just next meeting, start tightening things up.
Any other comments with regard to public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item. Traditionally, we have a staff report. I did let Mike know I was going to give him the opportunity to speak. There's no expectation. And Mr. Broadbent speaks. This is normally a time in which clerks would speak. I did put Mr. Broadbent. I'll open it up to any of the staff of LawPAC, but I'll begin with Mr. Broadbent. Is there anything that you'd like to?
Just had a couple of things just to bring to your attention. As many of you may know, Route 4 is anticipated to go into construction in 2022, and that does impact the commission because there will be some changes to the Route 4 boat launch and to the Route 4 turnout, which is adjacent to the boat launch. The Route 4 turnout is currently used by bulk water haulers. Our watershed manager currently inspects and administers a program where they have acceptable devices and they pull from the lake and they pay a fee for doing that, utilizing Lake Auburn for their water supply. That money's been collected into a water hauler funds savings account that the commission has. Once this project is awarded, we'll have no control over when that turnout gets closed. Will it get closed upon completion of the project in 2023? Or will it get closed and be used as a staging area by the contractor? I raise this issue because it will become an issue with the water haulers not having a location to get water from. Currently, the Auburn Water District does not have a station or a location where bulk water haulers can pull up and fill up trucks. Lewiston has a fill station at their public works facility, but it's merely just a hydrant meter in their yard, and speaking with Nate Landry, it's not quite adequate for splash trucks to be lining up in and out of your yard to do so. I've been working with another municipality that does have a bulk water fill station. Nate and I both went over and checked that out. I did find a location in Auburn, however, it is not close in proximity to the downtown, is on Outer Hotel Road near Cody Crane and Tambrands. The Auburn Sewer District has an easement on a piece of land that was set up for sewage to be disposed of. So it's set up ideally if you wanted to fill a truck with water or as opposed to discharge sewer into our system. That could be a candidate, but it's something that we're working on and it's not likely to happen this summer. Again, I'm just bringing this up so that you're aware in case the issue comes up of why'd you stop allowing us to pull from the turnout. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention for now. I guess that's all I really have. Just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much. I know I kind of sprung this. Is there anything that you'd like to make sure that the commissioners are aware of?
Yeah, I would just say that at the planning board meeting last night, planning board voted to recommend proposed changes to the septic ordinance in Auburn. The gist of it is right now you need 36 inches to a limiting factor in your soil in the watershed on your property to be able to build. That was recommended to be changed. You are now allowed to bring in, or this is the recommendation, is that you would be able to bring in fill to create a mounded system, so you don't have to meet the 36 inches below the surface of the soil. You can create that. So planning board voted to recommend that proposed change to city council with 3 additional terms to that change. One included that certain zoning in the watershed where it currently is 1 unit per 1 acre be changed to 1 unit per 3 acres. The second piece of that included water quality sampling that needs to be done in the watershed, along with this proposed septic change. And the third piece of that is having septics inspected, I believe every 5 years, and then at the point of sale of those homes. So
I would add also that the plan was to be established with AWD and stakeholders. So
Yeah.
I would assume
the monitoring plan,
Right.
right? The watershed, the water quality monitoring was to be done with partners, so
But
including
that-
Auburn Water District.
But that if degradation of water quality was found to occur, that it should trigger a moratorium on development.
On development, yep. So I just wanted to make the board aware that that recommendation was made last night, and we'll go to city council for first reading next Tuesday,
Yes.
the 19th.
I have a question about that.
Mhm.
If the water quality sample comes back as bad, is that a trigger for our leave?
That's a good question.
You
It
know what I mean?
depends
Is it
on
already
the
gone?
parameter. It depends on the parameter, and it depends on where the sample's taken.
Do we not have sampling spots out around the watershed now?
We do. I just did it
That's what I
today.
thought, so I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I don't know
we
where they
do.
are, but
To further discussion too, I think the gentleman that made that motion left that sort of ambiguous with regard to the testing. Auburn staff, John Blaze was of the opinion that part of that program would be developing a system to test at sites where the septic had been replaced. So creating a baseline, and so not just waiting for the water to get into the lake, but also being able to test on site.
What would they be testing on site?
That is an excellent question. I think they're still trying to work that out. I think they would probably look to test groundwater for all the things that you were testing, I would assume.
Yeah, so we don't
Turbidity would be something that they can't test.
We don't currently test any groundwater, so
Right.
that would probably be on the city's side of,
Yep.
on their scope.
Yep.
That would probably happen in the springtime, looking for breakout in the disposal field or around the septic tank. So that's something the city would do in the inspection process if there was an issue. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a future agenda item for this commission to have and be the responsible management entity.
Well, I hope it was clear from the planning board discussion to staff that planning board, when it talked about that, when we discussed the possibility of a plan, it was not a, we will check it once a year plan. It was like, in the same way that there are monthly reports and checks, that this would be done quite frequently. There was some concern about the idea of waiting a long period of time between checking.
I didn't think that was clear.
Okay, yeah.
Question for staff, Evan?
Well, this is the staff report time. I would give deference to staff to see if there's anything else they want to say
I did have one thing I forgot. I do know that I forwarded this all over to you, the official correspondence. We did get the demand letter, and I know that's later on in our agenda, but I did have the official certified copy that came in the mail. I didn't know, is that something I should keep, or who? I know we're gonna talk about procedures in the future, but I didn't know where this should land. Should this go to you?
I would assume it
Chair?
should live with you for now.
Okay, and then does anyone need a copy of that?
I also brought copies if people need. Okay.
All right, well, I have copies if anyone needs.
So I'll give you a copy now. Of course, it'll come up on the agenda later, and if anyone needs a copy at that time also, I guess.
Yeah, I'll have a copy.
I got a bunch.
Can I pass one?
Members of the public have copies?
Sure, Eric, could you grab 3 or 4 of those?
Don't tell me what's going on.
Okay.
Somebody else is interested? Good.
Is there anything else that staff would like to report? I guess Mr. Bilodeau is asking to ask a question of staff. Generally in a staff report, members don't ask questions of staff, but it really has been a practice of WAPEC during the staff report for there to be responses, I guess. So if there's no objection.
Yeah, back to the Route 4 boat launch, Mike. We were supposed to get, as a commission, $21,000 and $21,500. Did we get a check from DOT for that?
Mm-hmm.
And Sid had twice said, former clerk, that was going to be used for the Southern Link Trail, and to kind of get that going. We can look at previous minutes if we need to. Are we still earmarking that for?
Those funds are to be used to relocate the gates, because that's what we're charged with doing, because they're
Which is estimated to
reconfiguring
cost $4,576.
for the
So
gates. Yep.
the additional $15,000 is that section that begins the Southern Lake Trail, which is part of that discussion, remember?
I do not remember those funds being tied to the Southern Link Trail. It had more to do with parking and gate relocation within the boat launch.
I think that in the absence of clerks and institutional knowledge, I think, again, that's something we're going to have to add to the list to discuss at a future meeting. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we will move on to item 6, which is old business. And we did already hear from Erica a little bit. There's a proposed septic ordinance. On the meeting memorandum, you'll notice that I put possible action by motion. The commissioners during this discussion are going to have to decide if we want to take action on this and what specific action we would like to take. If we, the Board of WAPEC will need to discuss how it wishes to weigh in on this topic. I reached as a way of, does everyone, first of all, unfortunately, our council was conflicted out of the discussion on that. I can try my best. I know Erica was at the meeting to give a basic description of what the ordinance change is. Is that something people would like before we enter into any sort of discussion?
I'd like to know what it is.
Yes, okay. The current ordinance, so you will hear 36 inches, both ordinances reference 36 inches. And I guess the easiest way to describe it is that the current ordinance requires that the leaching field be at 12 inches below the surface, correct? That there be 36 inches to either the top of the water table or to some hard pack that the water would run off, that would redirect the water, meaning that we require systems to be 12 inches below the surface. That would leave an additional 24 inches between the system and that barrier. Yes? I'm good so far? Okay. The new system is an amendment to that. It would allow, as I believe, as little as 12 inches to the barrier of topsoil, but would require 36 inches, so that would require that there be soils placed on top to build up to that 36 inches. So it's really about how deep in the current soil something has to be placed. The retired state soil scientist explained it to us sort of thusly, that the zone of soil that best treats effluent is the organic layer, and that organic layer is found at the top, and I believe he referenced within the top 12 inches, but not always that deep. It's my understanding that the change in septic was to try to bring those systems so that instead of sitting below that layer, that organic layer that is best for treating effluent coming out of the system, that they be placed on top so that the effluent be required to go through that layer, that organic layer. I can clarify further. I'm just trying to make it as simple.
So they changed all the coding where the pipe gets laid, how deep the pipe has to be in that leach pad area?
Correct. So currently the pipe would be required to be at least 12 inches below actually the lowest point in the field. So if you happen to have a field and there was a dip in the middle, it would be 12 inches below that point.
Which still gives another 24 inches of
Yes,
drainage.
so the state soil scientists described in brief main soils, in particular around Lake Auburn, as having been, the majority of which having been deposited when the glaciers receded around 10,000 years ago. Those soils primarily being sandy, loose soils. That the topsoil within the state, all over the state, Auburn not being an exception, tends to be fairly thin compared to older parts of the continent, which is why our organic layer is essentially only 12 inches as opposed to being deeper. The soil scientist described some of the differences in those soils, with the fine soils that have organic matter in them and the microbes. He described those soils as trapping the effluent and treating the effluent. He described soils that are loose and sandy as a short circuit, essentially allowing effluent out of the system below the organic soils and below those microbes, so into soils that drain easily, so are not retaining the water, and also are not treating the water at a microbial level, so essentially allowing that effluent untreated to enter the groundwater.
Thank you.
I think an important piece of context is this 36-inch rule has traditionally, where it's in the watershed layer only, has traditionally made it difficult to meet that requirement. So it's been hard for people who own property in the watershed to be able to develop lots there, because it's been traditionally hard to find that 36 inches. So it has worked in a way of limiting development in the watershed.
And that was essentially its primary purpose, actually, was an understanding that because we don't have particularly deep soils, that finding those soils is incredibly difficult. That particular type of strata is that 36 inches is hard to find within the watershed. In fact, it's hard to find anywhere. So by adopting that, it essentially limited the number of houses that can be built. One of the things that the ordinance did not do was require that septic systems be placed on the lot on which the residence is placed. Dan, I hate to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine.
Can you speak to the design of your septic system?
Yeah, so I have a gravel pit, and pretty much if you have a gravel pit, you'll have the 36-inch number. I have a tiered system that drops 2 inches and goes into 12 pipes, 12 rows of pipes. Only the first 2 rows have the green grass on top of it, where I'm getting any kind of cation exchange or nutrient uplift.
So I was going to ask specifically about the easements that are involved with
Yeah.
the system.
So because I have this gravel pit, then the neighbors needed to have their septic systems put in the same type of soils. We were granting easements to these neighbors, and they brought their systems down into this aquifer soil area, which allowed for them to develop their properties. So you're basically looking at a very untreated septic design in a gravel pit versus something like you'd see behind someone's house where you have a raised bed or in the ground bed, and they're treating it right at their level instead of sending a ditch line 1,800 feet away to someone else's property that has the gravelly soils.
So if someone hasn't been following this subject, it's important to understand that I think it has been my experience in speaking to people who understand the topic that there are very few people that believe the current standard is better for lake quality with regard to treating effluent. In fact, it appears that it may be detrimental to lake quality. However, trade-off being it is incredibly effective at limiting development. It doesn't stop development. When development happens, that often happens with these clustered systems, but it has been overall incredibly effective at stopping development. I think within the last 10 years, we've only seen, I think it was 4 or 5 systems installed within the watershed. So
Several replacements, but
right,
new.
so only 4 or 5 new, right? So we're talking about, it has allowed us to achieve our goal of really limiting development within the watershed.
One other piece I would add is the recent Lake Auburn study that the City of Auburn commissioned last year. The final report came out in October last year. Part of that, this change in the septic ordinance that was proposed was recommended in that study. But the consultants have not acknowledged that it was contradictory to some of their other findings that repeatedly said, we don't recommend any more development in the watershed. So they acknowledge that piece, that this might be better for septage treatment, but they know that it would allow for more homes to be built, which they did not recommend repeatedly. And also in that study, one of their points was that if the septic change were to go through, they estimated 100 new homes could be built in the watershed.
Just in Auburn.
Just in
And I
Auburn.
believe our former clerks had posed some questions to state engineers based on that study, seeking some further guidance, some clarification of ambiguities, and they had indicated that they were not yet satisfied at all with the responses, the degree of response, the fullness of information. That's a bit of a problem, I think, in general here, where we have not even had a presentation directly from Auburn with data. We had a representative of the city of Auburn, seemed like a very helpful individual, but he was essentially here to invite us to a public meeting held in the city of Auburn, and it was one of these public discussions. I attended most of that discussion. The first part had a PowerPoint from the city administrator that I did not find particularly helpful. The second part had I believe it's the same former state employee who's an expert that's been referred to as having been at the planning board last evening. He was quite a bit more informative. He had raised an issue, I think, some degree of arbitrarity to the depth declared, but overall seemed quite persuasive regarding how soils can process effluent, depending on the level at which you are placing the septic system, so that it can be so that effluent can be processed at a layer that actually has bioactivity. But I see issues with how we are sourcing information here. We are following the newspaper. We are attending meetings held in Auburn. We have authority independent that I don't think is being respected by a conveyance of information directly from Auburn to this board. And besides that, I think it raises a lot of issues as to any vote that we would make, where we should be voting based on information that is incorporated here into our agenda, that is taken here as testimony, and that is discussed here. I don't think it's in any way sufficient to be voting here based on summaries, based on newspaper articles, based on things that are outside of our stream of information that is recorded here. So I take issue with that procedure thus far, and I would strongly encourage us to solicit more information, both directly from Auburn, should they like to present it, directly from Lewiston and any other of our constituent townships, in addition to gathering further of our own information, both in response to that study, following up what the clerks were doing, and perhaps initiating our own study.
So I think that raises a good point. That's something, again, with regard to policy, is something that we were supposed to have a meeting, but the commission did not actually invite the city of Auburn to present at that meeting. It sort of speaks to our need to stop sort of just going along the way we've always gone along, and recognizing that we have got some really serious issues in front of us. We are tasked with protecting an incredibly important resource, and that while there are ways that we've always done things, those may not necessarily be the best way for us to be informed. And I would argue that the more informed we are, the more authority we have to speak on a topic. So.
May I ask Dan a question?
Yes.
So are you saying, Dan, that we have authority over this area, and this board has the ability, power, however you want to say it, to prevent the enactment of what the planning board has suggested from the city of Auburn in the watershed area?
I believe we do, but that also raises the additional question of, we don't have counsel right now. And although I'm an attorney and I'm a member of this board, I'm not going to be advising or stepping into that role.
I know the answer anyway, so I'm
So this is my opinion I share with you, but I don't want to give a necessarily more detailed reply while we are in the absence of counsel, and I think we need counsel on that issue.
Mr. Lichfield, I feel confident providing an answer because that's a question that was directly raised of council at an earlier meeting, I believe late last year. The interlocal agreement states the following: the Auburn Water District pledges covenant and agrees, however, to consider recommendations from the commission, and also to exercise its regulatory authority over the lake and the watershed pursuant to its charter and law, and to enact, amend, or repeal those lawful bylaws, regulations, orders, or ordinances in such a manner and to such extent as is required or advisable to control and protect the watershed or waters of Lake Auburn in order for both parties to maintain their exemption from filtration requirements under the surface water treatment rules adopted under the Safe Drinking Water Act in accordance with the compliance agreement in order between each party and the Maine Department of Human Services and the United States Environmental Protection Agency clause, provided that it is indemnified by the Commission from and against all expense connected therewith whenever acting in accordance with the request of the Commission. In general, we are the enforcement arm within the watershed, and the AWD are the policymakers within the watershed. The interlocal agreement does allow us some authority with regard to policy and ordinance. It's something that we can do, but when we do it, we need to make sure that we are doing it as a well-informed body, because when we invoke this, we indemnify AWD of all responsibility for enacting those laws. So we are requiring you to do this. They do it, and they are now indemnified. So we can do that. My personal preference would be that we develop, if we don't have currently a relationship with the Auburn Water District such that we are informed enough and we can present our case well enough that they would enact these policies on their own without us requiring them to do so and then indemnifying them. But the answer is yes, we can do it.
So my question then is, this is under old business. Are they asking us our opinion, or are they telling us this is what we're doing?
We are exercising our authority, right, and responsibility as the Lake Auburn Water Protection Commission to provide our opinion on anything that happens within the Lake Auburn watershed. We are not beholden unto the city of Auburn. We don't need to wait for them to ask us for our opinion. We are taking this up because it is an important issue within the watershed and is well within our rights to provide our feedback. I know that's not
also
a
have the
very nice
authority.
answer, but
We also have the authority to write back to them and ask them to put everything on hold.
not the
for a short
city of
time.
Auburn. We have the authority to do that with the Auburn Water District. There's a piece that may be not understood. The Auburn Water District, by way of the Maine State Legislature, has been provided adjudicatory power within the Lake Auburn watershed and has the authority to enact ordinances that carry the weight of municipal ordinance, such that if the Auburn Water District were to enact an ordinance that is more strict than an Auburn ordinance within the Lake Auburn watershed, the Auburn Water District ordinance would carry. Likewise, if there were to be an ordinance enacted by the Auburn Water District, one by the city of Auburn, and the city of Auburn is more strict with regard to regulation, their ordinance would carry. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what we're talking about is we're talking about being able to affect Auburn Water District's authority to enact ordinance that carry the weight of municipal ordinance.
This is an Auburn ordinance right now, and
This
the
is-
Water District has supported the Auburn ordinance, the planning board has, and that's the path that it's going on.
An issue is that the Auburn Water District had concurrent authority to enact these ordinances. The Board of Trustees chose not to. In my opinion, sort of in a short-sighted, good-natured assumption that everyone was always going to get along. So in the absence of those ordinances, the only ordinances that dictate the use of private land within the watershed are those ordinances enacted by Auburn. Auburn Water District does have rules with regard to publicly and quasi-municipally owned land, but not with regard to private land.
So Rick, you're kind of asking what authority we have as a commission to stop plans that Auburn may have that may be contradictory to the
Watershed.
the watershed area and the quality of our water. And that's ultimately what you're asking, correct?
Correct.
What legal authority do we have?
We
as a
have the
board
legal authority to compel
maybe
the
stop something that may be contradictory to.
It is, again, I'm not a lawyer, okay? I'm just saying that this is the answer I recall receiving from the lawyer, because we did speak about this at length. We have the authority to compel AWD to enact and adopt, or to enact policy, bylaws, or to adopt an ordinance. If that ordinance is stricter than the city of Auburn's, then the AWD ordinance will carry and be enforced.
So if we, for the sake of discussion,
Yes.
request that they go back to the other depth, the original one, that is more stringent than what is being adopted right now. So the more stringent policy is the one that is pushed
I
through.
think this board needs a consultant.
Well, we need an attorney.
Yeah,
And an
no, we need an attorney.
So I'm just trying to get an idea.
Just trying just to understand.
And I guess my idea, in light of number 6, I think that falls into the further on down in this agenda with the moratorium, with the request from Lewiston. So it's almost a one-topic conversation.
Can I ask
So
a
what was the
clarifying
point,
question?
what is the point for us to, on the old business?
It
We just
appeared
get a
on, it
report?
appeared on an agenda as its own item, and so it was carried forward as old business. But we do not need to discuss it as such. We do not need to discuss it as a separate issue. We as a board could absolutely
Okay.
decide that this is tied in with the letter of demand from Lewiston, and choose to address it when we address that topic.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, clarifying question. So the Auburn Water District, it was my understanding, they did not actually adopt it. So the
No.
Lake Auburn Watershed overlay, I thought that Auburn Water had adopted that, and then the city of Auburn adopted the same language.
Right, so it is my understanding that both entities adopted an overlay or a map of the watershed. This we know, because we have both maps available to us.
He's talking about the map behind the bylaws for the protection of
Right.
Lake Auburn.
What the
I'm not talking about the map, but
You are talking specifically about the septic ordinances.
no, I mean, it's not just the entire Lake Auburn Watershed overlay
District, no.
district.
It did not. Sid checked, and the best that he was able to find was a set of minutes in which the Auburn Water District trustees acknowledged that the city of Auburn had done so.
Had used the
Had-
exact language that Auburn Water had.
At the time. It has changed over the years.
Right,
yes.
right, at the time,
But-
1974
right,
or
but
whatever.
it was an acknowledgement and not a motion of action. That's
So
what
Auburn
it
Water
meant.
had drafted it, the city of Auburn adopted it, but Auburn Water District did not
Chose never to
formally
adopt it.
adopt it. Okay,
Unfortunately, because that would solve a lot of problems right now.
right. Thank you.
Problems that we're not well informed on.
Exactly.
Question is, could the new septic ordinance be applied to just replacement systems? And address the, new development, just taking better care of the development that we have in the watershed?
Because of the 275 systems that are close to 90 years old.
Yeah, could we replace those with a better system, for sure?
It could be. My fear is that there are still lots that can be built under the current system, and my preference would be that I don't want a detrimental system going in. So, we've already established that I'm the chair of the planning board, and I've got a little over 11 years of service looking at zoning. And I will add my own 2 cents. My personal preference would be to have the most updated, modern septic designs that are able to treat effluent from private sewer. And that we concurrently have zoning ordinance that either limits or prohibits development in a way that we feel is responsible around the lake, and that they not be tied and conflated, my fear being that these septic designs are the best right now, and in 10 years, there might be better designs. I don't want to rely on something like a septic design to do what a zoning ordinance should do, because I think then we get stuck in the position we're in which we have septic designs that are very good at limiting new development and very poor at treating wastewater. And I think that as much as I want to limit development, because we know it can have a detrimental effect on the watershed, I, as a commissioner, do not feel comfortable saying that I support a septic system design that is subpar for the drinking water that we're trying to protect. So.
We had asked for some real data on which lots are buildable and which ones wouldn't be, you know, like what is the difference on that? Don't really have a good handle of, that report kind of said 100, like we had asked for that. If it said in the report, there had to have been something that they looked at that said, this lot, this lot, this lot, this lot, you know.
Well,
whether
we
it's
asked
buildable
for
or
it,
not.
did we direct the clerks to go do that, or?
Not as a commission, we had asked for it for the city of Williston, so it's something that, just food for thought, like looking at what are those lots? Where are they?
Well, I would say that we're at a point, at least in my personal opinion, where I agree with you that we need a concurrent zoning conversation and proposal perhaps, to the planning board at the same time that we decide on our approval or not of the, septic ordinance. But my fear is that if we go ahead and say we're fine with this new septic ordinance without tying it into the concurrent discussion and ordinance for zoning, that the zoning ordinance will be postponed for who knows how long. And in the interim, we have these new lots that could be approved by the planning board because they could meet the septic ordinance. So they'll be buildable, correct?
Well,
Without any adjustments.
Any
in the
buildable
zoning.
lot currently already exists.
Right.
So
but
there's
they're-
the planning board does not approve lots for building there.
Right, okay, so,
builder will
but
not
anyway,
build on their own.
they would meet the new criteria,
Yes.
4 lots would meet the new criteria, and potentially they could be built upon while we're waiting for zoning conversation and approval.
Yeah, which is the quagmire we've gotten ourselves in.
That's right.
I would add, Camille, serving on the planning board, I would suggest that this commission spend its energies on either the city council or the Auburn Water District, because the planning board in the city of Auburn does not have, for instance, the same powers as the planning board in the city of Lewiston. I'm not sure if the Lewiston representatives understand this. Auburn's planning board with regard to authority in changing ordinance is to act as in an advisory role only, and it is a non-binding recommendation from the planning board. So I agree, Camille, that we need to identify who those authorities are that can actually do these things. I would just suggest that we focus on the city council and the Auburn Water District.
Well, my understanding is the Auburn City Council, this will be brought before them next week.
Correct.
So, the question I have for the commissioners is, do we want to craft, perhaps someone craft an opinion that we give to the city council prior to the meeting next week about how we feel about the proposed change in the septic ordinance and implications for that in terms of development within the watershed?
That is something we can do. We have never done that in the absence of legal counsel.
I think that's the crux issue. We need to expedite acquiring counsel for this board. I've never been on any board or city commission that doesn't have counsel.
Well, to be fair, we do have counsel. We do have counsel, our council is conflicted out of this specific issue.
Yes, and
Our council is sitting
me
right here,
nothing against my esteemed colleague Jim Cross. Because of that conflict, we need counsel in these areas. I think we need it immediately, because the best that we can do to Auburn is state that there's some possibility we would take legal action, because there is some possibility we would take legal action. It's just simply undecided. Saying anything either way, anything other than completely neutral, I think is something we should not be doing, because we would be taking a legal position in the absence of having access to legal counsel. But I think the appropriate thing is to expedite, take as immediate action as possible to acquire counsel before forming any legal position.
Mr. Holmes?
Can I ask that the commission move to item 7, what is it?
B.
B. Yes.
Yeah.
B, 7B. Which is authorization of chair to seek and hire legal counsel to respond to demand letter dated March 31st, 2022.
So you are making a motion to postpone this item until we discuss item 7B.
Sure.
Is there a second? I'll give it to Ms. Brenchek. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? 1. Any in abstention? Not me. Okay. Authorization of chair to seek and hire legal counsel to respond to demand letter dated March 31st, 2021. Possible action by motion. I will say I utilize the chair simply as a placeholder. I don't think that it's required to be the chair. I think that what we do need to have is an officer of the board that is authorized to do so. We have other officers as well. So in the past, clerks have had the authority to seek out legal counsel and invite counsel to the meetings of the board on behalf of the commissioners. Currently, there are no policies or rules, again, that provide authority for any other individuals to do this. In the absence of rules describing who is authorized to hire legal counsel on behalf of the board, and because we are without clerks, it may be a good idea for commissioners to grant authority to the law by chair, or any other individual we see fit. Again, actually, I guess I just wrote that, or some other officer to hire legal counsel for the purpose of responding to the demand letter dated March 31st, 2021. I noted that if the commissioners decide to grant such authority, it really should occur through a motion.
I'd like to have a conversation about, there's so many conflicts within Boston City that would have a neutral like a Switzerland here, maybe. Look
I
for
do
the
it,
lawyer.
yeah.
Or Alan, like where's a, you know what I mean? Because those are gonna be the things that are hard to find. We have so many different pieces where Auburn Water District, Auburn.
Or
the
chair
city
and
of
vice
Auburn.
chair by
But it's
agreement.
conflict with everything, it's
Yeah,
not conflict
I
with the
know.
individual.
Yeah,
I will say that
'cause I don't have a problem with having it in it, but this is.
Well, I think it
so
can
in,
just be one person.
in preparation for the meeting, I hope I did not overstep my bounds. I made calls simply to see if there was legal counsel available. I called 7 attorneys, one of whom was very nice, but said there was no possible way that it could fit in his schedule. A second let me know that she would check for conflicts of interest and did not respond back. And a third, who has experience with municipal law. In fact, she previously worked with the commission, Amanda Meter. I believe she worked with the commission or with the city. I can't remember which one.
I'm not familiar on either side, so
Okay.
I'm not, it's sure, it must have been a very small project.
Okay, so.
What firm? Is it Eaton Peabody?
No, you know what, I actually left those notes in a folder in my garage and I realized it when I got here.
I would suggest that we ask that our council currently conflicted on these issues, offer a list of known practitioners in this area who are involved in those issues. If he doesn't feel conflicted from doing so, I don't practice in that area. I don't know many names of persons who do. I think it's a relatively esoteric area, but there are folks who do. Adam Lee, I know, has done that. Perhaps Jamie Bello has done that. But, you know, I think there's a known group of folks in this area who do that area of law.
So, actually, that is how I got the name. I did speak to Mr. Pross, and I acknowledge the fact that he's conflicted out, and that I knew I would not be able to ask for recommendation, but I asked if it would be appropriate for him to provide a list of names of legal counsel, lawyers in the area, that attorneys that have experience doing this. Amanda's name was actually one of the names on that list. Another name on that list provided some additional lawyers, but they didn't get back to me. So, I am entering this into the discussion just to point out that if it is something we want to do, we need to do it sooner than later, because it turns out it's hard to find a lawyer right now, and harder to find one that understands these nuances. Yes,
I make a motion to authorize the chair to engage counsel to handle this matter.
Can I ask you to amend your motion before
Sure.
you? Can you, can we say chair and vice chair co-concurrently?
Sure.
Just to make sure
Chair
that
and vice chair work together
we're acting
to do that.
And is this
Second.
specifically for the demand, response to the demand letter, or just to represent us regarding opinions? Because the demand letter.
A point of order, was there, sorry to interrupt, was there a second on the motion?
There was.
There was.
All right, so now you can discuss, sorry.
Oh, is this the discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't get the second.
I thought the demand letter that LawPac received was focused solely on the Grace Lawn, and not on the septic ordinance.
No, it encompassed both. Yep.
Okay.
I would suggest
Thank
that
you.
the scope be all areas from which our current council is conflicted.
Yes, I agree with that.
So we'll accept that as a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion on that? All those in favor? All those opposed?
Oh, that was in favor, so.
Yes. Abstention? Okay, so
I don't know.
this is now been amended to extend the scope to any issue on which our current council is conflicted out. Is there additional discussion
You mean on the original motion?
on the original motion?
So just recap, what are we trying to do, just answer the letters?
No.
Or
We are
to
trying to
question the
make,
septic
We're trying to get some opinion of
No.
that we're not well informed about? So we're not looking for a consultant to tell us what we need to know, we're looking for an attorney to fight what Auburn is wanting to do.
no, we are looking for an attorney to make sure that we are upholding our responsibility as the commissioners of LAPEC
and not exceeding our
and
authority.
not exceeding our authority. Yes.
All right.
Or taking advantage of what our authority is, and
Right.
we need to know what it is.
Yeah.
I think the concept of seeing a consultant is important, someone who can inform us, but I think that's not legal counsel.
Just one more discussion piece. I see the big picture that whatever ordinances the Auburn ends up with, the Auburn Water District should adopt those and create a baseline. Because now we can do upper watershed towns, and the city of Auburn can't change them again without the concurrence with the Auburn Water District having that same ordinance.
I think you were starting to get into the issue of our authority and not exceeding authority, and making sure that
But we can recommend to the district to do that. I have
We can.
a clear understanding of that.
But this conversation is about, are we gonna hire a lawyer?
This is a
Right.
question about whether or not we're going to
I
hire
don't
her.
know.
So I
I'm
think,
just thinking big picture.
no, I understand, but I think we need to stay
Okay.
pointed so that we're not conflating. Is there any other discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? None being, any an abstention? Okay, so, as I understand it, Mr. LaChapelle and I have the authority to seek and hire legal counsel, but we must do so together, yes? Okay. All right. The original motion was to postpone the topic of old business. It seems that we are moving, I would offer the following before. I think we are moving to a point where it is quite obvious that we feel that we need to do something, that some of the issues have been raised that we have not agreed upon or disagreed upon are how effective current systems are, whether or not those systems should be changed, what the effects of that are on the ability to build within the watershed. What I saw that conversation doing is moving to questioning about what our authority is to effect a change. I would suggest that if we want to continue a discussion about what our authority is to effect a change, that we consider a special meeting at which council can be present instead of waiting till our next meeting, because we only meet 6 times a year. My fear being that if we wait till the next meeting, that we cannot be informed. That we may be best served having that discussion after legal counsel has been hired. In the meantime, Camille brings up an important point, as does Mr. Doobie. I would offer the following as a compromise. I agree that it is not prudent to issue a new statement or to issue new findings in the absence of legal counsel and in the absence of information. However, we do have precedents as LawPEC with regard to proposed changes in the past. And in the past, LawPEC has held that we are in opposition to any changes which would represent substantial, or actually any, increase in development within the watershed. I don't know how much trouble it would get us into. I suspect very little if we were to say, at this point, we continue to hold that we are not in support of any changes within the watershed that would lead to additional development.
And nutrient loading, can we add that? 'Cause
I would love to add it, but I'm trying to stay well within the scope of what the board has put down in writing before. And I think that to say nothing at this point would quite honestly be a dereliction of duty on our part. I personally would feel comfortable reiterating that statement, which was, developed with the help of counsel. So, and I don't think we're getting ourselves in legal trouble by reiterating that. The next piece being, do we want to draft a letter, or do we want to physically send someone to a meeting to make this statement?
Or both?
Both. How do commissioners feel about that?
Which meeting would you send them to?
That's a good question. What meeting do you want to send them to? Do we want to send them to AWD? Do we want to send them to the city council? Do we not want to send someone? Do we want to send letters? These are all things that we have to decide. In the past, this board has simply relied on whoever was willing to do it to go ahead and do it. And I think it's important that we start to take our responsibility seriously and own those actions and say, we as the commissioners are doing this, not we asked someone to do it and anyone did it. I apologize, I know I'm getting heated.
Unified front.
Yes.
Is that a unified front?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it would appear that it would be the Auburn City Council that you would be addressing,
Right.
or somebody would be addressing.
Right,
Right.
It's definitely not the Lewiston City Council that would be addressing.
right. It would have to be someone that has authority within the watershed.
And this would be after our special meeting with our council?
No, this would be the
Make a
statement ahead of
statement
time, because the
Statement ahead of
statement,
time. Oh, that's right.
the statement's historical.
Right.
And if this meeting is occurring next week and we don't make any
Yeah.
statement at the council meeting,
They're meeting Tuesday night.
but we don't have legal counsel, I'm guessing, to represent us at Tuesday's meeting.
We do not have legal counsel. I
We're not gonna have
simply,
legal counsel in 4 days.
I simply called some lawyers and said, LawPEC is looking for legal counsel because our counsel is conflicted out. Do you have conflict? Is it something you can do? I did not go so far as to seek any further. As an interim chair, I did not feel comfortable doing anything else. So no, there's no. Amanda Meter said that it's a case that she could take on. I did go so far as to ask if she had availability on Wednesdays throughout the rest of the month, the rest of this month. She said yes, but we did not discuss like terms of employment. She did offer a price, but I think that's something Mr. Leshbel and I are going to have to discuss with the finance officer, with the treasurer. I can tell you, I think it was something on the order of $185 an hour or something. It was a really good rate, actually. But, yeah, it's, you know why? because we're a quasi-municipal authority. That's why. That was not the regular rate.
No.
So.
Well, and perhaps there are others that we could bet that against versus she's the only one available.
Absolutely. With
And
two of
other
us, we
firms?
can make a lot more calls, right?
To other firms like Eaton PBD, Woodard Current, people like that who
Yeah.
may have.
Pierce Atwood, Portland.
Pure South, that would, I think, would be conflicted out.
Did I do a?
Yeah. And I don't think Purdy Flaherty does a lot of municipal work. Yeah, they do Portland though, so they
Yeah,
may
they
have-
do.
That they may, and that's somebody that none of my familiarity, nobody's used, so there shouldn't be any conflicts.
One of the attorneys from Pretty Flaherty is the one that didn't contact that, but maybe if there's two of us that do this, it was really frustrating, actually. We're calling and saying, like, I'm not even calling to hire you, I'm just calling, like, can you tell me if you can do it, you know?
So just for my own clarification, is there a problem with us just writing a letter to the city council
There's,
as the commissioners in LawPAC without it being signed by legal counsel, just stating historically our stance?
We've done that before without
Yeah.
signing a legal counsel,
So,
just a letter from the commission.
Do you have a copy of what we sent before, if you draft something for us?
We have that.
Yeah.
that would be the question. I would say it needs to be as close to what was sent before as possible.
I make a motion, we send that letter to the city council.
Reiterating our historical
Right,
stance
historical stance and.
against development within the watershed.
Right, at this time.
at this time,
It is.
So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
I've got some. Go ahead.
It seems to be more impressive when a body is standing in front of you and talking at the table as a counselor. Getting a letter is not as,
I think it should be both.
well, we have a rather important meeting on Tuesday that I'm not going to be able to miss. Definitely not going to miss that one. So I cannot make this coming Tuesday's meeting. I don't know if the chair is in conflict, but I have full faith in the chair that he can express our views and move forward. I think it'd be the chair, vice chair, or even if other board members want to go, commissioners, but definitely a warm body presenting it rather than just sending a letter.
I'm
Seems to
sort
be.
of suggesting though that I.
Okay,
maybe
well, you can go
misunderstood.
and bring a letter,
Yeah,
certainly.
It kind of is your elevator speech, you know what I mean? It
Yes.
just, it gives you that elevator speech
Are you
without
willing?
going on to other comments that might not be in common with all the commission.
Right.
You know, so it kind of just provides
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I'm trying to think about I don't think my kids have softball on
Right,
Tuesday,
I-
so. I think I'm free.
I think I think it should come from the chair, and the fact that he happens to be the chair of the planning board is just coincidental.
And I would tend to agree. Being someone who serves on a board in which we receive letters, I can tell you the letters go into public record, but they don't necessarily
have the same impact.
because they're not always read out loud.
Yeah, you need to be there.
And I think it appropriate that the chair does do this. I think that if any commissioners, other commissioners are in attendance in non-speaking roles, that their presence should be acknowledged by the chair before the council.
I can go, I just think it should be in writing so that there isn't additional verbiage that is passed around that isn't in common, so that we have something written out that's gonna be read, that everyone has a copy of, so it's
Yeah.
transparent,
Right.
I guess, you know?
So what will be the process for the commissioners to see what will be said at this meeting? Email that we approve? Is that allowable?
I think approval by email starts to get into a really gray area of an unauthorized, unpublic legal meeting, like an illegal meeting. I think that the best thing to do would be to, because I understand we don't want one person writing this and then finding out what they wrote after,
Right.
right? Being the person that's going to read it, it sounds like, not that the motion has passed, but it may be me that reads it, I would feel more comfortable at least being able to provide feedback at some point, but it may be a good idea to have, to authorize a subcommittee of 2 or 3 to go back, find the previous resolves, use that specific language, and only that language to draft a letter.
Uses a template.
Well, more than a template, it really needs to be almost boilerplate, I think, for us to not get in trouble, but I think that that's totally doable. And not in the form of a resolve, in the form of a letter, but we have resolves with very clear language in them. I don't know how everyone feels about that, but
I concur. I move that we establish a subcommittee for purposes of locating prior correspondence and drafting as closely as possible in conformity therewith.
may I accept that motion as an amendment because we have a main motion already?
Right, okay.
Okay.
Can I amend or suggest that we add Erica, of somebody who would
It
have
hasn't,
access?
it hasn't been seconded yet, so yep. Mr. Doobie, would you like to?
Somebody who
include
would have
Erica?
access to this,
Certainly.
In what way?
to provide past resolutions or letters that we've put together with council previous,
Take care, Glenn.
so that if
See
we
you all
can't
soon.
locate it, we have somebody who we can locate.
Raises a question. All right.
Well, if somebody's sick, you have 9 council, you have 9 commissioners.
No, we do, they're just not present. Yeah.
Well, you
Yeah.
still have a quorum then.
Yep, exactly, yes.
So
We
you
have 9.
You
Yes.
have 9.
Yes,
That's not a
Yeah.
issue.
yeah. I apologize, we just interjected there.
It was just to add Erica to provide the past.
And this is in your motion,
To add.
having Erica?
Yes.
Is there a second on that amendment?
I'll second that.
So there's an amendment on the floor.
Yeah.
Does anyone need clarification on the amendment? Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? One being, any abstentions? Okay. There's a main motion on the, no, actually, that motion was already,
No,
I apologize. I think I did not take my notes well.
Oh,
With the main motion, I was thinking the main motion, the main motion is with regard to sending the letter and someone. So that main motion is still on the floor. Is there any discussion on that motion? And I believe that the motion was that it be was your motion that it be the chair
That
or?
wasn't,
I think it was gone,
I think it was,
or it was written.
Well, that, was it a motion? I don't believe it was a motion.
It wasn't a motion, I just stated it, but I can
Correct.
make it a motion.
Why don't you make a motion to amend this?
I make a motion to amend, to request the chair bring that letter and present it to the Auburn City Council at their next regular meeting.
So motion to amend, is there a second?
second.
Second. Is there any discussion on the motion to
Can you
amend?
slow down for just 1 second?
I know, right?
for chair to deliver message.
Mhm.
All right, sorry.
Seeing no discussion. This is the main motion. No, this is an amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, so the chair. All those opposed? One being. No abstentions? Okay. So we are back to the main motion, which has now been amended such that it will be the chair that goes, the chair will present the letter will be drafted by the committee to include Erica for the purposes of providing historical documents. The chair present that letter in person. Do we feel comfortable not appointing specific members and just saying that there will be, right? We don't have policies about this.
Who wants to volunteer, folks?
Yeah.
Get three
I'll be
people.
one person.
Get 3 people from the commission.
Dan? Anybody else?
Dan.
Alan? The other Dan. Dan
Are you
Doobie,
going to communicate about this letter?
Dan Doobie, Alan Holbrook, and is there anyone else?
What are we gonna do?
Say yourself.
You were gonna have to do it before Tuesday, at some
If we
point.
do it before Friday, because I won't be around.
All right. I'm gonna ask for a motion to amend to identify Dan Doobie, Alan Holbrook, and Amy Landry as those comprising the committee.
So moved.
Moved, second. Any discussion? None being, all those in favor?
I'm in favor of the committee.
All those opposed? Opposed, none being, abstentions, none being. Okay.
It's the message.
Back to the main motion. Yes. Which now is that the chair present a letter to be read to the Auburn City Council on Tuesday, that the letter reiterate previous stance of the board of LAPEC, that the letter be drafted by commission made up of Dan Doobie, Alan Holbrook, and Amy Landry, that Erica assist them in providing historical documents in order to be able to draft the letter.
That only took us 45 minutes.
I know. I know.
It's all good though.
I'm
It's all
sorry
good
to
work.
clarify, but you're not part of the committee then?
I'm not.
Okay.
I would very much like to see it before I read it. Them's the breaks. That's when you sign up for something, you know? All right.
Cool.
Any discussion on the main motion? None being, I'll take a vote at this time. All those in favor? All those opposed? One being. Any in abstention? None being. Is it safe to say that, okay, I'm going to say that covered our old business. And looking at this, no, we are in 7A2. I would ask that someone postpone this 7A2 to a future date. I have asked around. There doesn't appear to be too many people, and I think that is a discussion left best for policy because we will need to decide what it is that we want the clerks to be doing, and I think that fits well with some of what we said we would like to do at the next regular meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed?
Dan,
None being.
you can't raise your hand now.
New business 7A3 was previously a possible executive session because it dealt with an individual. I spoke to the individual. They stated that they would rather have this discussion. They responded in writing saying that they would rather have this discussion in public. I honestly think it's a fairly easy discussion, but it is in the same way that we need to discuss the fact that I was chair of both the planning board and that I was acting as an officer here. The commission will have this, so we've all received the letter of demand from the city of Lewiston. The letter was signed by Heather Hunter, the city administrator of Lewiston. It is possible that at least one, maybe both requests presented within the letter could require expenditure of funds by the commission. Normally, our treasurer provides information on the availability of funds and such actions. The commissioners will need to determine if they wish to continue receiving financial advice from Mrs. Hunter, if they wish to appoint a new treasurer for the purposes of possible fund expenditure in the future regarding specifically the letter of demand. My question is, will Heather act reasonably as the treasurer and separate that position from her position as the city administrator? And the board can say, we absolutely believe she can. The board can say, no, we don't. The board can act however we want. But I think given the lack of policy and bylaw and procedure, it is in our best interest moving forward so that no one has standing to come and say one thing or the other because we've acted on it. So, actually, Mr. Leschko has hand up first.
I have full confidence in Administrator Hunter acting as treasurer of this department, of this commission, no different than I have full faith in your abilities as a chair of the planning board to separate your roles and act in accordance to the commission. I see no difference. She is probably the best number person I've ever met, and it would be a shame to exclude her from any of it.
Is she withdrawing her resignation?
She resigned.
I didn't resign.
You didn't resign, Heather?
No, you
Oh,
voted,
you made an announcement that you would be resigning?
once we filled the treasurer, or
Yeah,
the
once
Once Lewiston gets a treasurer,
finance director.
she's running as city administrator and finance director from the city of Lewiston. I think next week she's going to become the police chief and then just move on. Her salary will be about $700,000 by the end of the year.
My minimum wage would be.
Yeah, so it's quite possible that the board ends up finding someone, but the idea is we've got someone who already knows what the numbers are.
She has no voting authority, doesn't authorize our funds. I have no issue with her remaining as treasurer.
Any? All right, so I think it is in our best interest to make a motion in which we state such. Yes.
I so move that we continue to ask Treasurer Hunter to provide us with the best information we have moving forward in this financials.
Could I ask that you add that we find there is no sufficient conflict of interest? I think, in my mind,
That's what I was
that's the
trying to
piece that
say.
we really need to
Yes.
say.
We deem that there seems to be there is no conflict of interest with her serving in this capacity.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second? Is there discussion?
Who's the second?
Amy Landry.
Thank you.
No discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote by hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? Unanimous. Excellent. I'm glad we can move on from that. Authorization of chair to call special meetings. I think I think it's obvious that we need someone. The clerks generally did this. I think that in the interest of cooperation, that we treat this one the same way we did as legal counsel, and instead of simply authorizing the chair, that we authorize the chair and vice chair to concurrently authorize special meetings.
A motion to authorize the chair and vice chair to concurrently call special meetings.
Is there a second?
I second.
I think Mary Ann got there first. So maybe you made, yeah, I was looking this way, I don't know. Next time we gotta sit on my lap.
Discussion, no discussion.
Yeah, we'll check the film, exactly.
It's good.
All right, there's a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote of this time by show of hands. All those in favor? Opposed? None being. Abstention? None being. Response to the letter of demand dated March 31st, 2021. I wrote that, with most of these, I wrote that there was possible motion required. That is because the board could have chosen or not chosen to act. We have a deadline of April 15th with which, by which we are required to respond. So LawPet commissioners have been made aware of the letter of demand from Lewiston. The board will need to discuss how it wishes to move forward regarding this letter. I am getting the sense from earlier discussion that, and I'm going to cut right to the chase in the effort of being efficient, that several members of the board believe that further discussion on this really requires legal counsel. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. We do need to draft a response. I did write something. I wrote draft on this. I had Mike give me his feedback. I have my laptop here. I want everyone to know that I did not write a letter for us. I have just been at this long enough that I know if there are words on a piece of paper, it's easier to change every single word to something else than it is to start from a blank piece of paper. So I do not want anyone to feel as though I'm asking anyone to take a specific position.
Are you telling us how to think now?
No, I'm not. I'm trying to make it very clear, but I want everyone
I
to
know what you
understand.
get. I know what you get.
Can I just say, why wouldn't we ask the letter to just say, can we get a formal response at a later date when we have legal counsel in place?
I think we could. We absolutely can. That's the, see what I'm saying, Mary? Like that's the idea, is that, that's why I brought my laptop, so that way, if you want to make this a one-sentence letter, that's fine. I could tell you in the letter, I would prefer that Heather wait to see.
We're going to talk about it in a second, aren't we?
I mean, I guess so. I'm just thinking that, I guess,
Please, Commissioner.
if Heather, I don't object to you having the draft in front of you, as long as you understand that it is a draft. Now, I would also prefer to do this in executive session, but I could not find anything in state statute that allows us to go into executive session.
Why would this be an executive session?
Unless we,
Just a
because,
question.
no, because this is something that might have legal ramifications, but it turns out that you can't do it unless you have a lawyer, so.
We'll be happy to leave. Or
Oh,
I'll
you,
be
no,
happy.
you are absolutely free to stay, that is fine. This is happening in
It would
open.
include
Yes.
us too, it's not just you.
So I'll give everyone a moment to read it. Ms. Brenchek has already suggested that it may be in our best interest to shorten it. I can tell you, my intent in this was to acknowledge receipt, restate our understanding of the importance of our position in protecting the lake, restate what we believe the demands were encompassed in the letter, and then state that we are going to seek legal counsel. It is, I don't think we necessarily have to do all those things. It's, again, easier to delete things than to start writing things, so I tried to fill something out.
I think the only sentence that really needs to change is the last sentence on the first page, just to be updated to reflect what we've decided to do today. Because it says, law pick commissioners will seek legal counsel during the next upcoming meeting. Well, we've now implemented a plan for, we are finding legal counsel in an expeditious manner, and we voted on a manner of doing so. And I think other than that, this letter seems quite agreeable and reflects everything that we've discussed today.
So you, instead of saying LawPEC commissioners, I'm gonna ask for, I think it will be too difficult to ask for motions on every single amendment. I think we go and then at the end we just.
Then approve the letter.
Right, so, Dan, can you please repeat? So the current last sentence says LawPEC commissioners will seek legal counsel during the next upcoming meeting of commissioners of LawPEC to clarify their rights and responsibilities as outlined in the interlocal agreement. Are you?
Just say, take out during our next upcoming meeting.
Yeah.
We are going to seek legal counsel.
That might be
To
something,
clarify.
yes.
So,
We are seeking legal counsel.
the commissioners of LawPEC, oh wait.
Or
The
seeking-
law tech commissioners will seek legal counsel during
Yep.
the next, so just take out during the next upcoming meeting.
Will seek legal counsel to clarify their rights and responsibilities.
So LawPEC commissioners will seek legal counsel to clarify their rights and responsibilities as outlined in the interlocal agreement. Further, the commissioners of LawPEC will determine all subsequent actions with regard to your letter of demand after they have had the opportunity to discuss their letter of demand with legal counsel. So, there is an entire letter. Mary Ann also made the suggestion that we could simply send one sentence. Now, one sentence encompasses exactly what we're doing. Do we want to send the whole letter? Or do we want to send a letter that is comprised of just that sentence?
I think acknowledging that you received it in that first paragraph is good. It's all, in
Yeah.
like when you go back to looking for data, that's all in one letter. You know, you're not looking for the demand letter again. This is what they're requesting.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I think this whole letter is good.
Yeah, I think it's
It's just an
pretty much
update
does the
to-
same thing, but reframes
Just change
things.
the date.
Yeah, the date as well, yeah.
Do you, I mean, the only other thing I was thinking is that are we still looking to hold a special meeting in April?
Right,
to-
because, well, let's just take care of this.
Yeah, right.
Let's take care of this and have that discussion.
Right, yeah.
So the letters, I think, vote on that.
Is everyone clear on the language change? Are there any other amendments that people would like to suggest to the letter? I guess in the absence of legal counsel, I was just trying to cover us as much as possible by
I
saying.
think you
like-
did a very nice job.
I think this sounds very good. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Mike is signing this thing. Anything from you?
Mike read it.
Evan sent it to me and I did review it. I had made some small suggestions and put them in and,
Yep. Good job.
well, don't give me
So we
credit.
need a motion?
Well, first we need to amend the date. When are you able to sign and send it?
Tomorrow?
April 14th.
Okay. So I'm going to change the date to March 14th. April.
I think we're in a totally different one.
I'll tell you what, it's
April's gone
been,
like this already, so.
it has been a whirlwind, folks. So,
Yes, it's one day early.
yeah, well, I can tell you, put it, like, well, you saw what I put together. As it turns out, we really need clerks, because that is a lot.
I know.
Like, to do that by
Do a
myself.
lot of work and hours.
You know,
Clerks or staff members?
staff members, they don't necessarily need to be clerk, we need someone who does it. All right, so the date has been amended to April 14th. The only other amendment made has been to change the last paragraph, so it now reads, LawPEC commissioners will seek legal counsel to clarify their rights and responsibilities as outlined in the interlocal agreement. Further, the commissioners of LawPEC will determine all subsequent actions with regard to your letter of demand after they have had an opportunity to discuss a letter of demand with legal counsel.
I make a motion, so moved.
Motion to accept?
Yes.
Second.
Second.
Debate.
You got it. No.
None being. All those in favor? All those opposed? Oh, you were casting your vote in favor or
In
in opposition?
favor.
Okay, I apologize. It's my fault for not saying it.
No.
Okay.
So you'll email that to me, I'll put it on Watershed letterhead, sign it and send it out tomorrow?
I will email you that as soon as I get some active Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Out of my
Yeah.
hands. Okay. It is getting late. I think that we could possibly discuss these. I think Erica's request is actually fairly straightforward and probably won't take a long time to discuss.
I would postpone that though.
Can we go, or to our comments were in regard to sending this letter, getting counsel. I mean, I don't think we can wait on an actual response, or, so are we planning a special meeting?
Yes, I said it earlier in the meeting, I think we absolutely need to plan a special meeting. I think it's probably in our best interest to acquire legal counsel and at least meet with them this month, understanding that it may take subsequent meetings. I'm afraid if we wait to split the difference and wait till next month, that,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we're.
So, if that's the case, Rick and I will share Wednesdays that we're available. The Wednesdays that we're available, we'll send to you all, and hopefully we can get a quorum on one of those Wednesdays. Hopefully we get everybody. Yeah?
Yes.
That works, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Rick,
We'll talk after the meeting.
I gotta write this down, forget. Email, Rick.
Kind of bears on finding someone to represent us first.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I only have one name because only one person actually got back to me. It was infuriating. Well, frustrating, I should say, maybe not infuriating. Next, actually, before we get to E, I have a motion to authorize the secretary to respond to the letter of demand, seeing that the original letter of demand was addressed to the commission care of our secretary, Mike Broadbent.
I'll make that motion.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? None being, motion carries unanimously. Erica, you asked to have a possible discussion of funding an updated watershed management plan.
Yep.
You want to go ahead and ask?
Yep, so I had reached out to the consulting group, CDM Smith, who prepared two of the large previous studies that were done, the two diagnostic studies of Lake Auburn. They have extensive background information and experience with data pertaining to the lake and the watershed. So I've talked with them, and they offered a couple different prices for a couple different types of documents depending on what we would want. The first one is a watershed management plan that meets Maine DEP guidelines. That includes a watershed survey, which would be, they gave me a quote of $20,000, and the accompanying watershed management plan would be $30,000. So together, that's a $50,000 report. Another option to add on to that is a water quality analysis and sort of a nutrient loading deep dive into the watershed. That option is a $30,000 report. And the third is a detailed BMP plan. So that's project-based. That's taking what they would get for information from a watershed survey and plan and basically listing out how do we put this into practice. And that plan is $20,000 to $25,000.
Would that include our forestry operation? The best management practices updates?
I don't think that would include forestry. I think it's like site specific, but that's a conversation I can have with them. I think it was more, we found this site with culvert work that needs to be done, or this site that the embankments are eroding away, that type of thing, but I don't see why forestry couldn't be part of that.
Yeah, I would assume that because we engage actively in timber harvest, that may be unique to us, but because it's something that we do, that would need to be included.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be in the management plan, and then if we wanted that in the BMP plan, I don't see why we couldn't do that. So my request to the board, so this was not a budgeted item for this calendar year, but I do think it's time to update this. The last time the plan was done and was in 2010. So I would ask the board if we could approve the $50,000 for the management plan, the survey and the plan, and then the $25,000 for the BMP plan, which in my mind is an associated document. It's how do you put into place what your overall plan says you should do.
So moved.
So you're asking for 75 total?
Yeah.
So what's in the sinking fund now?
I know, I was just gonna ask.
$327,000.
Oh, I do need to add.
You
I
have a motion on the table. You have a second, then you can discuss.
Yes, there is a second for Mr. LaChapelle. Excellent discussion. So there was a question about the singing fund.
Can I contribute to that discussion?
Yes.
I have applied for a source water protection grant and a capital, no, I always get it confused, CIP, and there's a different one, it's capital something, from the Maine Drinking Water Program for cost sharing funds for these. And I'm sorry I don't have that, it's on my other notes that are on my desk, but I applied for those. The grants applications were due end of March. They should announce in May with awards for those funds. I think the capacity development grant is what it was. So source water protection, I believe, was up to 20,000, and capacity development is up to 75% of the project with a max of 30,000. So the watershed management plan specifically, source water protection grant applies to that. And for the BMP plan, that was the capacity development grant. So I don't anticipate having to pay out the full 75,000. Just so we're clear. But in case we don't get those grants, that's the overall cost.
I know I'm a voting member, I'm also a voting member on the planning board, and it's always been my practice not to make motions as the chair, even though I have the right to do so. In this case, I am going to make a motion to amend to state that the motion, that the amount be not to exceed $75,000. Is there a second? Second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I would have a discussion on that because I do think it needs to include the timber harvest, and if that's a different price on the BMPs, I want to make sure that you've confirmed that, so I don't want to lock you in, you know, without, because I do think that needs to be.
But if she gets the grant money, then you're still fine.
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
gets one
just
grant
take
money.
it.
Well, okay, so I would
Not
like
to
to
exceed
take,
100.
Mary Ann, that was going to be my
Yeah.
next question, and I was going to make a motion on that.
Friendly motion, do you?
Right. But, no, I hear you, but my motion,
I don't think you
my
want to lock
motion,
it
I
at
might,
75, I'm going to not vote for that.
that's okay, I'm standing by my motion. So the discussion, any other discussion? Yes, Heather?
Can you clarify your friendly amendment to say funded from the sinking fund? So we know where it's being appropriated from? Land acquisition.
So no action has been taken yet on the motion, so I'm going to rescind my motion. I will make a new motion to amend that the language say, state an amount not to exceed $75,000 to be taken, to be funded from the sinking fund. But that will require a second, because, second. Discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? 1, 2, okay. Did you get that, Mike? Okay, excellent. Forestry is very important.
Real quick,
Yeah.
I'll just make a motion as this commission should have a moratorium on logging until we get our best management practices in order. We'll let Erica let us know when that order is in order.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table. Could you please repeat your motion?
That there'd be a moratorium from this commission on our properties for logging until our best management practices are updated.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion that we place a moratorium on our on logging activities. Did you say our logging activities?
Yeah, so we can only control our properties.
On our logging activities, on our properties, until our BMPs are updated. Our BMPs for forestry. Are you still in favor of second after clarification? So there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion on the board on the motion?
first, a few of us in Lewiston are a little shy of moratoriums. But being said with that, are we under any current contracts with anybody that's cutting wood? Are there
Nope.
any active contracts out there?
No.
No. I just want to know
So
before
we have nothing scheduled.
nothing scheduled, nothing. Is there a problem? Has there been a problem? Like,
We're talking all this time about septic systems and nutrient loading and trying to stop this and trying to stop that, but one of the greatest contributors to the phosphorus growth in this lake has been the logging operations, and not just Lawpex, but also the other private landowners. So it's something that we want to update in the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn as well, to cover all properties in the watershed, which is part of that process. And we need to set a good example by having the best management practices and our updated forestry plan in hand before we go and cause more soil to go in the lake.
so is that suggestion for anything in the watershed?
Just our properties in the watershed.
Properties that we own.
Okay.
Heather.
We have had our forester out, and there are best management practices that he's presented to us, correct? That are used.
There's still a different than what a site would be, what a site plan would be, because forestry is a little bit lighter. And along the waterfront, I think it needs to be within your so many feet from the waterfront, it needs to be more strict
Yeah, we
than
probably
what
do
the
need
forestry
stricter.
best practices are.
Heather, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Logging represents a source of revenue.
Correct.
How much revenue do we annually capture on average?
So this year's budget had timber harvesting at $14,000. We've already exceeded that budget.
Oh, good. So it won't negatively impact us?
It won't, for this year.
For the budget.
This year.
For the budget for this year, if
Okay.
everything's done.
Okay.
And logging is like big operation definition, if we had a tree that was dangerous, we'd still be able to cut that tree down. And it's not considered logging, defined logging operations, I guess. Because I think it might be a storm, or it might be something across one of the trails or something. We want to be able to clear that stuff,
Yeah, I think we
It's
would call
something that
that
was dangerous.
maintenance.
maintenance. of the
Yeah.
tree, not your
Safety
intention,
hazard or
obviously.
something like that.
Right.
Is there additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll take a vote at this time. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Only because I was unclear about the motion.
Okay. So one opposed,
I got lost.
abstentions?
Yeah.
None being,
I
okay.
got lost.
Back to this. I'm not sure,
Did you
yeah,
vote on the main motion?
we,
Did we?
no, we did not.
I don't think so. I think we
Authorizing-
voted on the
authorizing
70
the-
I didn't want to limit you to 75, they all did.
Right.
I think the main motion was
So
giving you the money.
so we're back to the main motion now. I believe the amendment carried, and we are back to the main motion. Which is, I know.
I thought we finished.
I thought you finished. Yeah.
No, they never took a vote
We
on
did
the
not take a
original
vote on the
motion.
main
So what did we
motion.
vote on that I was?
So is there any further discussion with regard to authorizing Erica to spend an amount not to exceed $75,000, funding from the sinking fund, to procure the management plan and survey and BMP study? No further discussion. At this point, I'll take a vote by show of hands. All those in favor? All those opposed? None being? Motion carries.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Nice, is there a second? Second, all those in favor? Meeting is adjourned.